You might feel like One Nation came out of nowhere, but they haven't. The economic conditions have been in motion for decades. Starting in the 1980s, both Labor and the Liberals have made a series of decisions to move money away from working people and essential services and into corporate profits and the pockets of billionaires. 40 years on, wealth inequality has never been worse. Real wages have been going backwards. Household debt is at record levels. And it wasn't always like this. If you go back just a few decades, ordinary working people could afford to buy a house, raise kids and go on holidays and do it on a single income. You could go to university for free. If you needed a home and couldn't afford the rent, you could get into public housing. Now we see a lot of people saying they want things to go back to how they were. But it's worth remembering why things were better. They were better because we had an economy which worked for people and not just big corporations. We had publicly owned banks, telecommunications, airlines and electricity. We made things here in Australia. We were more self-reliant. Big corporations, they paid a fairer share of tax and governments used it to invest in core public services. People were members of unions and they used that collective power to win and hold wage rises. But from around the 1980s, Labor and the Liberals, they started to change the way things work. It had a lot of names. Neoliberalism, economic rationalism, globalisation, trickle-down economics. You choose. But what it involved was three key things. Selling off public assets to big corporations, making it harder for working people to get a pay rise, and reducing how much tax big corporations pay while watering down the rules they had to follow. And what it meant was people paying more and having less, while big corporations paying less and making lots more. These decisions were taken by Labor and the Liberals at both the state and federal level. They've been taken over time not just here, but in the US, the UK and so many other countries. But wherever they happened, the results have always been the same. Bigger profits for big corporations controlling more and more wealth, more power concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer people. On the handful of occasions Labor might have pushed back, like when it tried to make mining corporations pay a little bit more tax in 2010. The mining industry ran a cashed-up campaign. And instead of fighting back, Labor rolled a sitting Prime Minister and gave in. Fast forward to today. Big gas corporations are funding the campaign to stop an increase to the taxes that they pay from selling our gas offshore, publicly owned gas. Let's go through some of the details in each of these areas. Since the mid-1980s, Australia has undergone one of the largest privatisation programs in the world. Labor and the Liberals, state and federal, sold off nearly $250 billion of public assets. Things like Telstra, Qantas, the Commonwealth Bank, nearly every power company. Corporations that are now worth billions and billions more and make billions which go to their executives and their shareholders. At the time, they said it would be good for the economy. They called it more competitive. But what resulted wasn't competition. It was a few corporations controlling entire markets. To make massive profits, the more expensive their services became for the people who used them, the more profits they took. The Commonwealth Bank was privatised by the Hawke and Keating Labor government between 1991 and 1996 for $8.1 billion. Last year alone, it made $10 billion for its executives and shareholders. Qantas was privatised between 1992 and 1996 for $2.1 billion. Last year, it delivered over $1 billion in profits. It used to run for the national interest, and now it's run for the interests of profit margins and largely offshore shareholders. When electricity was privatised, it started costing people more. And the profits, they're being shipped off overseas to their new owners, often US private equity firms like BlackRock. The government also opened up childcare to private corporations. And now over half of childcare centres across the country are run not for the kids, not for the parents, but for private profit. And it's everywhere. When you pay for parking at a public hospital, when you pay a toll on the freeway, you pay 4 of them, when you pay your internet bill or your phone bill. Prisons were privatised, employment agencies, telecommunications, even things like the management of offshore camps, which are used to detain refugees. Now big corporations control so many aspects of our lives that you don't even really notice. You just have to keep paying the price. And the price keeps going up. While public assets were being sold off, Labor and the Liberals were also undermining the rights of working people to resist. As a result, over the last 40 years, real wages have stagnated and insecure work has increased dramatically. Don't just believe me, ask your kids. And in the 1980s, almost 50% of the workforce was in a union. Now only 13% of people are in a union, and most of that is concentrated in the public sector. During the 1990s, the Hawke and Keating Labor governments negotiated with the unions to move away from wages based on the sector to wages based on the business. And between 1991 and 1993, Labor and the unions negotiated these things called the Accords. It took wage disputes out of the workforce and into the boardrooms, and it took away the incentive for workers to organise and build solidarity and power in their workplaces. The Accords led to real wage cuts. Actually, it was their design. They triggered a massive redistribution of wealth from working people to the profits of big corporations and billionaires, creating the conditions for the massive wealth inequality that we see and feel today. While Margaret Thatcher openly crushed the unions, Australia's unions were crushed by a Labor government with an agreement, a handshake and political spin. Under the Liberals, things got even worse. Howard, when he was Prime Minister, tried to push people into individual contracts, and thankfully it cost him the election in 2006. But the problem was, Labor didn't give working people the power back to organise or take the action needed to win and hold those pay rises. And real wages have been going backwards, and working people, they can't get ahead. While working people got whacked, big corporations got handouts. 40 years ago, the corporate tax rate was 46%, and now it's 30%. That's if they pay it. Because now 1 in 3 big corporations pay zero tax, and there's 79 major corporations that haven't paid any tax for the last decade. You see, rules around how much big corporations could charge and how much they had to pay workers were almost totally dropped. And at the same time, the government gave the banks a lot more power. It became easier to lend more money. Foreign banks were allowed into Australia, and personal credit cards became more widespread. As a result, and it was a planned outcome, household debt exploded. Australia went from having one of the lowest levels of household debt to one of the highest in the world. In the 1980s, Australian household debt hovered safely at a stable 45 to 50% of disposable income. Now household debt is around 210% of disposable income. So let's wrap this up. The reason you feel like it's harder to get ahead now than it was 40 years ago is because, it is. Deliberate decisions from Labor and the Liberals have redistributed massive amounts of wealth from the public to the private sector. It's created more billionaires, more wealth inequality, higher prices that feeds power and the wealthy. But for working people, it's created lower wage growth, more debt and more anger. Some things were better in the past. People could afford a home, go to university for free, get a home loan because the system was fairer. And here's the thing. We're not going to fix it by blaming migrants. Migrants didn't make this mess. In fact, we're all in this together, confronting the same harder reality. The major parties made this mess, and now Pauline Hanson is exploiting it. With the same anti-migrant rhetoric she's been running for the past 30 years. Blaming migrants won't make big corporations pay their fair share of tax. It won't redistribute wealth back to working people. Labor, One Nation and the Liberals, they won't fix this. The Greens will. The Greens are fighting to make billionaires and big corporations pay their fair share. And we plan to replace these parties so we can make big corporations pay and invest in the things that people need. To stop One Nation, we need to fix the conditions which they're exploiting. To make housing, healthcare and education affordable. To give people hope for the future. It's not about being meaner. It's about demanding better. Let's do that together.
Authorised by J. McCall, Australian Greens, Canberra.